Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you'd like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today we have a real treat. We have Dr. Kay, who's a returning podcaster here. I have the privilege of talking to her today because she has the #1 most downloaded podcast on the Maverick Paradox podcast, so that's fantastic. She's becoming extremely well known for shattering limitations and the work that she does with entrepreneurial millennials. So hi, Dr. Kay, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun, and this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm excited that we're talking about millennials and Mavericks.
Yeah, I mean, it's great because people are asking when you're coming back. So I know you're popular.
Thank you. Well, it's always great. You know, there's a lot of Mavericks are very, they are the leaders, they are the drivers. And millennials are going to be the greatest percentage of people, generations in our population now. I don't know if I said that really, really well, but they're growing, and so to really understand the psychology of millennials, how they are in the workplace, how they are in terms of the entrepreneurial world, what makes them tick, what gets them stuck, and how to be most useful, both if you're somebody working with a millennial or if you're a millennial yourself. So I'm glad we're doing this today, as I said, and I think this is something we should do a deep dive and look at all of those aspects and see where we go.
Brilliant. That's a great idea. So when I was thinking about the millennials topic and the conversations we've had before, I realised that there's quite a paradox with them in terms of what people feel about them, what they think about them. Everyone's talking about millennials, which is kind of funny in the sense that millennials, what's the oldest, is now 38, and everyone still refers to them almost like they're teenagers. So it's interesting to really get behind that. What's your view on this paradox of the millennials?
Yeah, I think it's key. I want to say something to what you said, and that is that they refer to them as their teenagers, and that's one of the things we talk about, is that it's a generation that really hasn't grown up.
Oh.
So it is one of those things. We're going to talk about some of the stereotypes, and to me, this millennial paradox is essential to understanding how to work with millennials, and even to help millennials understand themselves better and how to be most effective, whether they're working for somebody else or whether they're working for themselves. Doing a lot of research, it's been one of the things that really stood out to me in a way that I haven't seen when other generations are spoken about. Usually older generations, they've got a lot of gripes about younger generations, and there are always things that we speak about with the generation and we tag them with. For example, millennials, one of the things we do is they haven't grown up. They're kind of teenagers. They're still living in their parents' basement. Mm-hmm. What was interesting to me is that as I researched, in addition to the work that I do with millennials, as I researched the studies that were out there, they were almost in direct contradiction. I would read one study that said they are the most entrepreneurial generation. I would read another study that said, nope, not entrepreneurial at all. One that said they've had more businesses by the age of 35 than their boomer counterparts. Another study that said by the age of 30, they had 30% less businesses than their boomer counterparts. And so I really was digging deep to see how we could have so much misunderstanding, both of things like, are they or aren't they? You'd think that this could be just a matter of fact. And then also the personality and the characteristics. One of the things that I saw that really stood out, many of the listeners may know Simon Sinek, who's well known in his, he's spoken about many issues that are key in the leadership arena, and he speaks a lot about millennials. Mm-hmm. And he's come up with some issues that he raises and concerns about millennials. And then there are so many people that have literally not only disagreed, but taken offense, especially millennials, with the things that he said. So for me, it's been a real question of, one of the things that's fun we're talking about, because we talk about the Maverick Paradox. One of the things I think that's very important to understand is the Millennial Paradox and how all of this fits. So one of the things for me that I saw is that people are looking at different groups of millennials. So if you look at different groups of millennials, you're going to get a different perception of who they are. Who you are is going to determine what you see when you see millennials. So that's going to be really important. If you're a millennial, you're very likely to see millennials differently. If you're one of those millennials that's considered to be privileged, you're going to see it differently. If you're a boss that's dealing with a group of employees that are millennials that are not showing up to work on time and don't kind of think they have to, you're not really going to understand or relate to the entrepreneurs that I see that are millennials that are super successful and working their tail off and are up at their desks and doing their, morning routine at 5 a.m. So does this make sense to you, Judith, from what you're seeing, this paradox and how people are seeing different things and then tagging them? The problem with tagging and labeling is that it freezes things instead of putting us in a position where we can use the characteristics. Even one that's very common is social media has been a detriment and disconnected us. Now, there's truth to that, and there's also truth to the fact that being, so connected in social media has given millennials something that older generations didn't have.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot to unpick there. I think one of the first things is people are looking at millennials as they're one group, and there really is two major groups. So you have the millennials that we used to call Generation Y, who grew up in an environment very, very different to the ones that we're now calling late millennials. Almost in the fact that if you think about how they were raised and the environment they're in, so you've got the Generation Y, early millennials, often they had boomer parents. So the parents had more money, they might have paid off their mortgage. They're in an environment where the recession hadn't really hit. There was bountiful opportunities. So they were much more optimistic as a group, but they were also safer. So they took less risk because, they had helicoptering parenting in some degrees. And the internet was new and all that. And then you've got the late millennials, right after the recession has hit, so they really understand that, being raised by predominantly Generation Xers, who as a group tend to be a lot more cynical, who are squeezed more because they've got older parents they're looking after, they've got the children they're looking after, there's less money around, completely different environment. I mean, I'm aware of, two girls, one's a late millennial, one's an early millennial, and they're really, really different. But I think what's probably interesting about millennials is that they're not as easy to define as people believe they are, and they're trying really hard. And what I've noticed is that back in, say, early 2005, 2006, when we was talking about Generation Y at the time, I was saying this group of individuals are probably going to end up acting like Mavericks as they age because of just the vast number of them. But the difference with this group is they won't have the skills, and they're not Mavericks by personality, and they won't have the influence yet. But as this group has grown in number, as you say, predictions are by next year 50% of the workforce will be millennials. What's actually happened is that for them to stand out and to be seen different, they have to act like Mavericks. So some employers are treating them as the Mavericks, but because they're not Mavericks, they're really struggling. So they're not getting the direction they need. They have an autonomy too early. And also organisations are going, I don't understand why these people aren't acting how normal people of this age are supposed to act. It's like, why aren't they doing their dues? Why aren't they working all the hours we tell them to work? Because that's the way they need to get ahead in this company. And they don't really understand that, life is very different if you're growing up assuming that you'll leave home in your early 20s, and buy your own house, and life would be easy in that respect, compared to someone who's saying, oh, I might never get my own home until I'm 40. I'm never going to so you're gonna act in a very, very different way, and you're gonna look at experiences. So they're going to enter the workplace. So if you look at millennials, as a group, especially the later millennials and Generation Z, they're going to go to an organisation and they want to be developed and they want to be trained, because they know there's no job for life. They know the organisation doesn't really care for them, even if they say they do. So they need to be able to get ahead and get their own stuff. And the latest thing is, get a side hustle. Whereas Generation X will be like, you mean have some, side employment? Yeah, we understand that. And it's that, how do I get this side hustle? Because they know no one's looking out for them, which is sad in itself.
Well, it's interesting to me, because I was reading, and I want to tell everybody, go read your blog post about millennials, because it's got a lot of really helpful information to understand where millennials are coming from. And again, we're making generalizations, and also how things employers need to understand, so that they don't get into spots where not only do they have unhappy and very vocal on social media employees, but also so that they can maximize a positive situation for everybody. But one of the things that I thought about is that, on the one hand, one of the things you talk about is how the Mavericks are not, these true Mavericks, the socialized Mavericks, but they can act like them. The thought that I had, and again, coming from more of the world of working with entrepreneurs, is that I think there's a lot of millennials that are wired up as Mavericks, but that it got stifled for just the things that you're thinking about. And I think it's very difficult sometimes to look and say, well, this is somebody who's behaving like a Maverick, but they're really not. And knowing whether or not, with a different life circumstance, they might have really looked like a Maverick. Being a boomer, from the boomer generation myself, we were very passionate about causes. And if you look at millennials, they are also passionate about causes, although some of the numbers that surprised me was that the numbers are a lesser percent are concerned about the environment than boomers, which was really a shock to me, actually, to read that. And I don't know if that study is accurate or not, but it was a surprise if that's true. But one of the things that's clear is that I don't think it's so true. I think Gen X is in a different situation, and we don't talk about them enough.
No.
But we do talk about the boomers, and there was a passion. We had a fight for the causes. And even though millennials, on the one hand, do fight, they fight, corporations, they fight government, they didn't fight. There's a different kind of fight that boomers had that not only gave them grit, but I think they gave them a little bit of passion mixed in there. This is the therapist in me speaking, okay, because, my background is both as a clinical psychotherapist and a business and marketing strategist. Coming from the therapist understanding, when the boomers started to fight for their causes and rebel, and so many things that we take for granted now that were so different when I was in college, but it got intermixed with our fighting for independence from our parents. Millennials are not fighting for independence in the same way. They've had a very different relationship with their parents. Even things like music. I grew up and my parents are like, oh, that music. Where today, most millennials and boomers will listen. That same music. They are all listening to the Stones. They're all listening to really transgenerational music. It's not just an era and the others are going, could you turn that down? I can't stand it. There are so many things that boomers fought and other generations fought their parents on, whether it was greater independence, whether there were sexual issues. There were so many things that were shocking, or they had to push for their independence against. And millennials, both the Gen Ys and certainly we see it also with the late millennials, they didn't have that fight in the same way. So I think their interest in social causes and their vision, some of the studies have talked about numbers that were pretty staggering, where millennials are willing to take way less money in income, even though income is really important to them, if they have a job that they like or love, and if they're working for a cause.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Right? It's interesting because people don't talk about it in this way, but it's very much in there when we look at them and we say there's not the drive. Well, there's not that same drive. They are living in parents' basements. They're not pushing to get out of the house in the same way. They don't have that need. I mean, it's very interesting when you look at it from multiple perspectives.
Yeah, what's interesting with that is that, as you say, these millennials are Maverick Behaviorists. They're behaving like Mavericks, which means they're quite fragile. So it's very easy to push them back to being conformists. But it's also as easy to nurture that Maverick nature. And the thing what you were saying about parents, it's quite different because parents actually represent security. So you're not going to push away from your parents if you're never going to, you don't want to be 30 sharing a house with 4 friends when you can stay in your bedroom. And
yeah, it's very, very different because in the boomer generation, it was really, you were out of the house. You were pushing to get out of the house unless you lived in a very conservative family, because again, there's different cultures. And one of the problems with millennials is we're studying people, for example, in college. Well, what about all the millennials that are not in college, either because they've chosen they don't want the debt or because culturally they're out getting jobs? So we're not studying, I think, a full range to give us this fullest picture. But there's definitely something where when it's comfortable to be home with your family, it's very different than a generation that was out protesting in the streets. Not to say there's no protest, but it's not the same people that are protesting and were going for their independence. And very, very different psychology. And it's interesting because a lot of I think the overlay here, we can nurture their maverick nature, or we can nurture that, or not nurture it, and they can end up conformists. We need to look at also the deep desire for connection that has been put in a funny position with all the social media. So everybody says we're more connected, and yet in a lot of ways we're less connected. We don't go out to drive to meet our friends or to take the train or whatever it is that people did as much, because you've got a false sense of connection. So when we say that they're conforming, one of the things I want to add is that they're conforming in one way, but they're also looking to be connected. So having these more subtle understandings can really help us to bring out the best. If we understand that what the millennial is looking for is a sense of connection, a sense of belonging, we can understand that conforming behavior in a different context.
Yes, and I think that connection is really leading to the causes that they're fighting. So millennials are expecting true diversity and true inclusion. They expect to walk into a company and find that company represented by the people they see on their street. They expect if a company has a corporate social responsibility that they're actually really demonstrating that, and it's not all words. And that connection is, I need to see you connected to other people, and I will do meaningful, purposeful work that builds a connection with other people and other things. And I think that's different. And I think that's one of the reasons you need to lead them better. So I think, if you are a corporation or an organization that has to manage millennial, I think there's 7 main things to consider. I think unlike Mavericks, where you can just lead a Maverick, I think with millennials, you need to lead and you need to manage. So they really need sympathetic management, because quite often they don't know necessarily the how to do something, but they need to be inspired leaders so they can survive on the modern workplace. And if they want to make a powerful impact, they will need to be shown how. So whereas a Maverick will go, okay, I want to be influential here, I'll just go off and find out how to do that. If you want a millennial, you need to say, this is what you need to do. People constantly talk about the fact that, they really need it and stuff. I don't think they're needing what it is that they want to perform at the rate that you want them to perform. But to do that, they need to know what they're doing and how they're doing it. So they need regular feedback, because they struggle to know how to meet the expectations of the organisation. So they want to be mentored, because there are a lot of them, and people just assume they can just get on with it, but they can't. They need to be mentored and coached so they can improve and develop. And I think that's a positive thing. I think the third thing is a blended life. So whereas baby boomers would just work until they drop, and Generation X would like a work-life balance, would like it, but except it's not really going to happen. Millennials and Gen Zs are very much, I want my life to be completely blended, and it needs to be ethical. So it's not about being 100% available to the organisation when the organisation wants it. They really want a proper return on that psychological, employment contract, and they expect the technology that they have around them to be blended into the organisation. And the fourth thing is collaboration. Everyone's talked about how they like to collaborate, and that's kind of a bit how they were educated as well, in the kind of project-based things, and they would look to activate their network. So I think the last three things is that they need to trust people. So whereas I think other generations accepted that maybe their boss isn't someone they could trust, but they would just knuckle down and get on with it. Whereas I think Millennials and Mavericks are like, if I can't trust you, I need to move on. And I think that's where organisations are really struggling, because quite often the managers that are in charge don't know how to engender trust with the people around them. We've talked about the diversity and inclusion bit, and I think the final thing for managing Millennials is to recognise and support them, because I think they can be quite emotionally fragile, and that's something that needs to be considered. So I think those 7 things will help to manage the Millennial, I think. What do you think?
I think it's so. Yeah, my brain is kind of going. I've been thinking, okay, so that's in the workplace. Let's translate it to entrepreneurs, but let's also look at where before we get to not the workplace where you're working with somebody, but you're working for yourself, which has its own challenges for entrepreneurs. I think one of the things that's very key is that Millennials want the collaboration, they want the mentorship, they want recognition. They do want to walk in and kind of from day one be seen as more knowledgeable than they may be. Yes. And that's one of Simon Sinek's things, is like everybody got a trophy, which many of the Millennials say, hey, don't talk about me like that.
Yeah, but you gave the trophy out. We didn't. You know what I mean? We gave them the trophy. They were upset about it.
I know, right. So I think one of the things that is very key from what you're saying is that all of these things are really true, and there are some steps that Millennials have not had, that where other generations had to go out, roll their sleeves, and figure it out. Because they're so used to having their opinions validated before maybe even they had much validation for their opinion. Parents really listened. They maybe sometimes, we always want to listen to our kids, but sometimes they listened and gave them the sense that they knew more than they did, or set them up for a situation where walking into a corporation, they would think that people would be valuing their opinion from day one or month 3, as opposed to really learning first, earning the trust of their employers and other coworkers first. So I think we have to look at all the sides of this, is that employers have to understand the desire for mentorship and the need for feedback, because they're used to getting lots of feedback and lots of positive feedback. And in some ways, Millennials are very adaptable, but in other ways, they are very fragile, because they haven't been asked to kind of hit up against the same things and just kind of pick themselves up, dust themselves off. Like one of the things that so many Generation X and Boomers and other generations was like, let it roll off you, sticks and stones. Whereas they were really taught not sticks and stones, words can't harm you. They were taught to be very sensitive to words. And so there are certain resiliences, like you're saying, that haven't been a muscle that's been as well developed. So I think that while employers need to look at what the Millennial is looking for, I think Millennials need some education, and we need some collaboration. It's almost like family therapy here. All sides need to understand that where one of the things that I've seen, not with my most go-getting Millennials, but others, they hit a block and they stop. And you and I've talked about that place where I don't know how to do it, and they stop. where they really need to start to develop that muscle of figuring it out, of doing it on their own, of managing. While we want them to get feedback, we also want them to become more self-sufficient and able to manage with less feedback. If they're going to be more maverick, which, we want them to develop into leaders, and not fall back into those conformists.
It was interesting when you was talking, it just made me think about the difference in my childhood. So in the UK, back in the day, there was like one TV station and then there was two and that was it. So, and it wasn't on all day. So you're in the school holidays and you've got probably 2 hours, three if you were lucky, of children's TV. And then that's it. So, and there's no telephones would cost a fortune to phone your friends. There's no tablets, there's nothing else. So what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
You're off school for 6 weeks. What do you do? Well, you make up games with your siblings and your friends, and you get
resourceful
and pen them up around the house. But the thing is, what it did is developed curiosity, resilience.
Mm-hmm.
The what do I need to do next? It's not the go back to the parent and say now what. Whereas like nowadays, with all the technology, it's become a point of, oh, the tablet's run out of power. I'm not sure what to do now. It's like, well, go read a book, go do, and it's like, so
it's passive learning versus that active. One was much more, you were left to your own resources and you became resourceful. One is, if you look at what happens when somebody's on a tablet, they're much more passive. Different parts of the brain are stimulated and developed. So it's not that there are not good things about that, but you've got to be compensating. And when we see it in the workplace, it's interesting where millennials are excelling and where they're not excelling. So I think having this whole picture is huge. And when I look at entrepreneurs, and again, I'm slanted because the millennial entrepreneurs that I see are the ones who are the go-getters. They are the Mavericks. They are the ones who are more driven. They're not the ones who are sitting there and saying, I want to do this in my lifestyle. They may say, I'm working towards my lifestyle, but they're getting it right now, or else they wouldn't be paying me. They wouldn't be at that point where they're saying, okay, it's like, I want to have this next level of impact, or I want to create this bigger business, or I want to do something that where my footprint, really makes a bigger difference in the world. There's a lot of millennials that go into entrepreneurship because they can't get the work. They're not liking the way they're treated. They're used to being treated a certain way. They go into a job and they have a very hard time either getting a job altogether, or with some of those things like the fact that to them, if they get the work done, it doesn't matter whether they do it on the beach or in the office. Whereas a lot of bosses will say, we want you in the office. And and we want you in the office at 9 o'clock, and we want you staying till 5 o'clock, and things that seem unfair, they just haven't seen the world like that. So a lot of them are what I call reluctant entrepreneurs. They're not the ones who are choosing it. They're choosing it because of the image that they have about entrepreneurship. And the truth is that a lot of people are guilty because we feed an image of entrepreneurs as something very different. Entrepreneurs, you're building a business. A lot of them fail. A lot of them, a lot of entrepreneurs have serial businesses before they have one that succeeds. And there's a lot of hard work that goes into building it. I know that people talk about work smarter, not harder. I see that later in the cycle. I can't think of entrepreneurs that have successful businesses that didn't go all in the beginning. And a lot of millennials, they've read a lot of this hype, work smarter, like I want the lifestyle, I want the balance, and they're not prepared for what it takes to have a successful business. So the idea of entrepreneurship, and this is one of the things that came up in the research I was doing and comes up when I'm out there speaking to millennials, is that there is an image, there's a lifestyle, there's a making a difference, and owning my future, a vision of freedom. There's a lot of things that are appealing about entrepreneurship. And yet many millennials, and I want to say not all, because there are some that are doing amazing,
of course, yes,
amazing things that are changing the world, right? So we don't want to be, putting everybody in that bucket. But even those that aren't, I got to say, it's not just a matter of their fault or they're not motivated, but they've also been fed a bill of goods. And now they go out and they try and do what they've been told they should be able to do, and it doesn't work. And they're discouraged. And now they're discouraged from work. They're discouraged for entrepreneurship. And that's sad to me, because there's a lot of really good talent that isn't getting harnessed.
Yes, I think
because we're not really because we're not preparing. We haven't prepared. I want to say we haven't, because they're grown-ups, but we haven't prepared many millennials. And whether people want to say, like Simon Sinek does, one of the number one thing is parents' fault. Well, there's a certain point at which we say, yeah. There's a certain point at which you say society, and there's a certain point at which we say, let's stop assigning blame to anybody. Let's really look at what needs to happen to have a vibrant workplace, to have a vibrant entrepreneurial community, and to raise the next generation of both employees and entrepreneurs in a way that's productive and gratified.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of looking at it. I mean, in a way, they've kind of been sold a lie, in the sense that they see Steve Jobs, but don't know that he started out in a garage, or not really understand what does that mean, starting out in a garage.
In fact, it's very much, we look at Bill Gates, we look at Steve Jobs, and it's always part of these idealized images. He started in a garage, and next thing he's like, Apple. And we're missing a lot of steps and that development and what these people really went through. So it's great to know that you can go from the basement to all kinds of success and making a difference in the world. We need to help people to understand what that entails and to figure out what it is that's the best fit for them. Not everybody's a maverick. Some people can behave like mavericks. Some people are truly mavericks, but they don't know how to express it, and we need to help them to express it. So there are steps that we have missed. And to me, the most effective thing now is to go with the word. You used one of my favorite words before, and that is curiosity. And so we want to engage our curiosity. We want to engage the millennials' curiosity, the boomers, the employers, the colleagues. We want to get everybody to be really curious and to go to those parts of us that wants to make a difference and to see, okay, let's really look at this. Let's see if we can get beyond our individual filters, right? Let's get beyond our filters and see things. Let's look through the eyes. Instead of calling millennials lazy because they show up late, right? It's easy to say, they don't have that drive. They want to go home. They don't want to stay like I stayed at work when I was making, when I was like climbing the ladder, I stayed at work. I was the first one there, the last one to leave. Well, what is it in the psychology? Is it laziness? Is it different emphasis, different things that are important? How does this fit together? Let's not get into a judging match, but let's get into an understanding, and then what to do to get our businesses, our lives, our countries, globally, not just yours and mine. I mean, I'm sitting here in the US, you're, in the UK, but to get things on a place where we're creating the world, that not only the world we want, but the world we want to live and work in.
Yes, and I think that millennials are as intelligent as every other group that's come forward. And I think I think what we need to remember is they've learned what we taught. They did what they were told to do. So I don't know why people are moaning about it. They are the product of what we sown and raised, and they're there. And arguing about it or moaning about it is silly when they are 50% of the workforce and they are your future boss. At the end of the day, we need to take the things that they're good at and enhance that. And the reason they can't do certain things is just because no one ever thought to teach them. I'll give a really basic example. I remember being at a school in, high school in very early on, so maybe like 12 or 13. And I remember being taught how to write a business letter and how to address an envelope. And it sounds really silly, but that was part of the curriculum. Whereas now you can hire a graduate who can't, who has the envelope the wrong way round or upside down or no space for a stamp. It's because people say, well, kids don't need to know that stuff because they need to teach them quantum physics or something. But it's like, yeah, but they still need to be able to address the envelope. So so at what point do they learn the different formats for different types of letters and things like that, which is a common practice in the workplace? But we don't think it's worth teaching them until they come into the workplace and they don't know how to do it.
And then we say, why don't they know how to do it? So I think, one of the things that's clear to me is that we want to understand characteristics. We don't want to get caught in labels. We want to have appreciation. And you could say, wait a second, Dr. Tay, isn't that what we're talking about, is that these kids got overappreciated? Some did, some didn't get appreciated enough, but it's about appreciation of what they do have and helping them to move so that they can actualize, they can take what they've learned, they can take what they're good at and actually use it to get to that level of creating what it is they've been hired for, what it is in the business they want, or what it is in their personal life that they want. So it's to appreciate, but take appreciation and make it not just this thing where we say, good job, but we get a little more concrete. It's really, I really appreciate the way you're able to do that on the computer, that, so quickly, or you saw this kind of solution in a situation that I wouldn't. And teach them how to think those next steps. Give them the info, like nobody's going to know how to address an envelope without learning, but there is, Google. And also help them to just start to bridge these gaps, but not do it by all this millennial slamming that is going on. We're slamming them all over the place. And just what you said, we created this and then we're slamming them for it. And I think probably because a lot of people say, I didn't teach my kid. I mean, I did teach my kid, but I didn't teach, they say I didn't teach my kid how to, address an envelope. I did when it was shocking to me at a certain age, because I learned that in elementary school. Okay, let's make sure we know how to write a check. And they say, but I don't write a check anymore. I send electronic checks. But you might have to write a rent check. You just might have to do that. So it's to teach them the skills, but it's on a more profound, those are really important. Writing a rent check is really important. Learning where the steps are that will enable you to manifest what you really want in the world is, I think, what we're looking at. And so understand the characteristics, understand that they're different, get away from not only the labeling, but the judging through the labeling. Because the truth is, when people are using these labels, they're not usually using them in the way you did in your article to say, let's understand what they need so that we can have a vibrant, flourishing workplace. But it becomes something that's a slam. And if you judge anybody, whether it's a worker, whether it's a child, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a friend, and you get into that mode. Now, I'm not saying not to be discerning, okay? I'm not saying you want to be discerning and you want to see what needs to be grown or learned. But when we get into that judgment, we actually box people in to be more of what we're not too happy with and what we don't want to grow. We're putting our attention on the limit instead of the possibility. So if we want to talk about shattering limitations, we want to place our emphasis on creation, on learning to be in a certain mental, emotional, creative state that we can generate the change that we want within our world, within ourselves, within our employment, within our relationships. And we need to really teach people how to do that, because while it's significant and we do need to teach people how to address those envelopes or write those checks, the biggest skill is to teach them how to generate what they want and to have big vision and to close that gap between having the vision and creating what their vision is about. Millennials have big visions, and we've got to get the generations working together more effectively, less labeling, less judgment, and making that a partnership. This is a time of collaboration. And in a lot of ways, we have the model for it, the beginnings of the model for it. In some of the parenting that was a little flawed, had a lot of groundwork, because we don't have, we don't see the older, if we're millennial, we're more open to older generations than I think we were. So let's make the most of it, and let's really live from possibility instead of the limit.
Brilliant. I think that's a fantastic place to end. A really good place to end. I think this has been a really fun conversation, a bit different from my usual ones, which is great because it's always good to shake things up. Will you come back and let us dig deeper in some of these issues?
Yeah, I would love to. I'd love to talk more about not just the psychology of millennials, but more about, I've delved into the psychology of Mavericks, delve into that further, the psychology of business. And, if I can say, if there's anybody that is either a millennial or working with them, I got to say that what you do with corporations is amazing. If anybody wants to look into this deep dive of like some of the things we've talked about today, reach out to you, reach out to me, and see how we can be helpful in this realm, because it's a very exciting time with tremendous possibility for what can be created. And that translates into changing the world and changing our pocketbooks and changing the way we feel. This is a time that I don't want to end on a negative note, but I want to end on a note of promise. And that is that there's a lot of people that are focusing and feeling kind of bad inside about what they can create or not create. And you and I are both resources. We're helping them take those feelings and concerns and using them as impetus for really turning things around. It's like when you recognize that and you see that place where you're hitting up against it, then use that. And so I want to say, reach out to you, reach out to me, and see what you can do to make a shift in that.
Brilliant. And I will have your contact details in the show notes. So thank you for coming on board, and I will look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you for having me. This has, again, been a really fun conversation. I hope we can continue it on social media as well as in our different, parts of the world.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Dr. K as much as I have enjoyed having the conversation. If you would like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group, and my website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.